It is 10:30. We'll call the meeting to order. This is the Brevard County Local Coordinating Board for the Transportation Disadvantage. It's June 19th, 2023 at 10:30. If you would all please join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, anyone wishing to make a comment, please fill out a comment card. I think you can hear me out there. Introduction of members. We'll start in the back against the wall. If you please introduce yourself and then go right across.
Jennifer Stabler, Special Gathering.
All right, we'll go to the next person right here, the gentleman in the black. Thank you. Ken? Thank you. Yes, ma'am? You?
Emily Slate, member of the public.
Thank you.
Renee Webster, member of the public.
Thank you.
Christy Cavallo, member of the public.
All right, thank you. Terry, you want to introduce yourself?
Terry Jordan, Space Coast Area Transit.
Thank you. Okay, I can't see behind the dais, but anyone over here?
Ron Shepard, Space Coast Area Transit.
Thank
Don McCarthy, Space Coast Area Transit.
Georgiana Gillette, Space Coast Transportation Planning Organization.
Thank you.
Sarah Collins, Space Coast Transportation Planning Organization.
Diana Adams, City of West Melbourne.
Karen Fetters, Space Coast Area Transit.
Lance Parker, Space Coast Area Transit.
Carmen Baez, Space Coast Area Transit. Jonathan Scott, Space Coast Area Transit.
Thank you. And then we'll go right over here.
Sarah Beasley, County Attorney's Office.
Debbie Flynn, Space Coast Transportation Planning Organization.
Hold on. Jennifer Cleveland, disabled writer and advocate.
Alicia Wilson, Disability Representative.
Camille Tate, Disabled Representative.
Carlos Colon, FDOT.
Linda Howard, Citizen Advocate.
Andrea Young, City of West Melbourne.
Arlene Nolte, representing the elderly.
David Darm with the Commission for Transportation Disadvantage.
All right, thank you. And we'll move right. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
Helen Miles, Space Coast Area Transit.
All right, thank you. Again, comment. If anyone would like to make a comment, please fill out a comment card and give it to Yvonne Miles over here in the corner, and you'll be called on to speak. Old business. We're going to be discussing the items that were tabled at the May 15th meeting, and we're going to talk to Ken Harley.
Good morning. Ken Harley, Space Coast Area Transit. We're going to be discussing the update to the Transportation Disadvantage Service Plan. The Transportation Disadvantage
Is
Service
your mic
Plan.
on? Is your mic on?
Might want to get closer so she can't hear you right behind me.
The Transportation Disadvantage Service Plan is the annual updated plan that's developed between the Transportation Coordinator and the designated official planning organization. And it requires a development plan, a service plan, a quality assurance component. The plan is used by the local coordinating board to evaluate the community transportation coordinator. That is what Debbie recently did with the community transportation coordinator's evaluation that you approved at the last meeting. We've made some minor adjustments to the Transportation Disadvantage Service Plan, which is outlined in the handout that you received, as well as in the copy of the plan that was provided to you. On page 3 of the plan, the effective date of the memorandum of agreement that was between the Commission for Transportation Disadvantage and the Space Coast Area Transit was changed to reflect an update date of July 1st, 2021 through June 30, 2026. On page 5 of the plan, the routes were updated to reflect an increase of routes from 20 to 24. On page 12 through 13, the population profile was updated to reflect the data of 2020 rather than 2018. On pages 23 to 24, the information was added regarding household availability of vehicles, and that information came from our came from our TDP Transit Development Plan. And page 4, information was added in regards to COVID-19 impacts on travel behavior of those individuals who are using public transportation. And with all transportation agencies, there was a decrease in ridership during the COVID pandemic, and ridership trends are beginning to rebound from that for most transit agencies. On pages 40 through 41, the outreach initiatives was updated to reflect information for 20 and 22. And on pages 44, the barriers to coordination information was added. And one of the biggest barriers is the fact that some of the funding that Space Coast Area Transit received from Federal Transit Administration will be going away through the CARES Act. And we also added information on page 60 to reflect some of the accomplishments. And one of the major accomplishments was the 6 awards that Space Coast Area Transit received from the Florida Public Transportation Association at its annual conference last October. We adopted the Transit Development Plan. We instituted the Talk Transit with Terry program. And we've initiated the Comprehensive Operation Analysis, which is looking at all of our routes to analyze them to make sure we're operating those routes as efficiently and effectively as possible, and where adjustments are needed, we will be making those adjustments. On page 65 of the TDSP, we've modified the language for the trips under the prioritization level. That section was actually modified to conform to the requirements of the TD Commission. Before, we had trips established as medical appointments, food shopping, employment, none, and other. And then, other. Now they've been categorized as medical. And under the medical category, that includes all types of medical trips, whether it's going to a doctor's appointment, dialysis, or any medical-related trip. Under nutrition, that includes going to grocery stores, it includes going to food stamp appointments, or anything that's related to nutrition for clients that are utilizing the Transportation Disadvantage Program. But it does not include Meals on Wheels. Then we have the employment category, which are trips for job interviews, going to work, as well as job-related benefits or included shelter workshops. And then life-sustaining, which includes trips to social service offices, visiting spouses in nursing homes. It includes shopping, but not grocery shopping. It also includes going to social and recreation program, volunteer work and support groups, and others are included in that program. Then on page 66 of these are the categories and what's permitted on each of those categories, as previously mentioned: the medical, the nutritional, employment, educational training, and life-sustaining trips. And under the TDSP, we had a categorized trips that 45% of the trips will be medical, 5% will be nutritional, 20% would be employment, and other would be 30%. In 2022, the actual medical was 28% of the trips provided, nutritional were 5%, employment was 16%, and others were 51% of the total trips that were provided during the 2022 fiscal year. And we've updated the language in regards to eligibility criteria. All passengers desiring to take advantage of the Transportation Disadvantage Trust Fund program for their trips must complete an application. And there are 2 ways that a person may become eligible to receive services. One, if the person's over the age of 60, and we must validate their birthday information. They can submit a driver's license, a birth certificate, or a government issued identification. This was one of the concerns that were brought to our attention during our last audit by the TD Commission. And also the second category of people would be those who are disabled. And under that category, any physical or mental disability is outlined by the American Disabilities Act. And a person can submit a letter from the Veterans Administration, from their doctors, from a certification from one of the partner agencies, or other means that we deem are necessary to provide proof of their disability. On page 67, we add Promises Inc. as a coordination contractor. On page 71, we established that there will be no more than one complaint per 100,000 trips, per 1,000 trips provided. We added the TD helpline, and we added a criteria for no more than 5 no-shows per 1,000 trips provided. And then we updated the information in regards to the trip rate that came out of the rate model calculation. The previous trip for an ambulatory trip was $181 per passenger mile. A wheelchair was $311. That's been updated for an ambulatory trip for $218 per passenger mile for an ambulatory, and $374 for a wheelchair trip. Those were the changes that were made to the TDSP. And again, the Transit Development Service Plan is updated on an annual basis. These are minor modifications that were made to the plan this year. And if there are no questions, we'd like to ask for a motion to approve the update to the Space Coast Area Transportation Disadvantage Service Plan updated June 19, 2023.
I make a motion that we approve the TDSP update.
And it must be by a voice vote.
It's a roll call vote.
Roll
Yes.
call vote, yes.
Got that? Have a motion? Have a second? We'll have a roll call vote, please. Ms. Miles, roll call.
Yes.
Of the voting members, yes.
Jennifer Shore. Approve.
Arlene Nolte approved.
Can you speak into the mic?
Andrea
Aye.
Linda Howard.
Approve.
Carlos Colon, approve.
Camille Tate.
Approve.
Was it to me?
Alicia Wilson. Alicia Wilson.
Do you approve or disapprove?
I approve. Jennifer Cleveland.
Approve.
Debbie Flynn.
Just the voting members. All right, thank you. Motion passes. Thank you very much. I just want to make a comment to that. I have all the slides and things telling us about the changes that were made, but you don't give us the actual document. I don't have any of these pages that the changes were made. And I know that that was an issue last time. This is how it got tabled, is that we didn't, well, I don't think not everyone had the document in time, but I have the packet that was sent to me in the mail, but it only tells me on the slides for the corrections that were made. I don't have the actual document itself. So going forward, maybe please have the actual documents. Slides are nice to point out what the changes have been, but I'd like the actual document. So I don't know if anyone else would like the actual document.
Yes, I would like to have it.
Well, we were sent it last time, so I just reviewed it because we already had it.
All right, thank you. Okay, let's move on to the next item. This is the updated policy PLC 8, Transportation Disadvantaged Local Coordinator, Debbie Flynn.
Good morning, Debbie Flynn, Space Coast TPO. Today, we're back here for policy PLC 8, the Transportation Disadvantaged Local Coordinating Board update. During this update, it is required, occasionally the Space Coast TPO may find it necessary to amend its policies to reflect the most current rules and regulations per the Florida Administrative Code Rule 41-2.012 and Section 427.0157 Florida statute. In this update, it's mainly acronyms that were cleaned up, Space Coast TPO to abbreviate Space Coast Transportation Planning Organization, TDLCB to abbreviate this board, just to make it cleaner. And we also added current language from the Florida Administrative Code and the Florida statute that was updated or revised that hasn't been updated in our policy in quite some time. And it's just language that was more clearer to understand. Such as duties of the TDLCB in the absence of the chair and the vice chair who would run the meeting. In the event of the absence of the vice chair, the TDLCB members will select a member to temporarily assume the duties of the vice chair, and then they can conduct the meeting instead of postponing the meeting. And then annually is to evaluate the community transportation coordinator's performance was added. Another one was what constitutes a quorum, a majority of the total filled memberships instead of 6 members. Sometimes it's hard filling our positions here, so the filled seats would help our meetings continue since we only meet 4 times a year. Emergency meetings was added. This may be this type of meeting will be held for the purposes of acting upon matters in judgment of the TDLCB requiring necessitating immediate action prior to the next meeting of the TDLCB. This is in case of emergency such as COVID that happened, that we can do a virtual meeting, emergency meeting. Sorry, I jumped to virtual meeting for the COVID example. For virtual meetings, the TDLCB or a committee thereof may hold meetings virtually using communication media technologies during certain declared state of emergencies such as COVID. We also provided clearer language regarding alternate members' responsibilities and termination of memberships. If a member does not come to 3 consecutive meetings, they will, their membership will be rescinded and a letter will be sent out by Space Coast TPO. And also, we revised the nominating committee language. This committee shall consist of 3 members, the TDLCB chair, and 1 Space Coast Area Transit staff member, and 1 Space Coast TPO staff member. This committee will select new or replacement members for vacancies from eligible applicants within the county for non-agency mandated positions. So those were the major updates of the policy, and I just want to reiterate some changes that are coming up regarding members' time of termination is coming up, and members who have 3 or more consecutive meetings that they've missed. A letter will be sent to Mr. Randalls, rescinding his appointment by Space Coast TPO staff. Ms. Nolte's alternate position will be moved to a regular member if she chooses to do so after this policy update is presented for approval to the TPO governing board. There are 3 members whose appointments expire on July 23rd, Mrs. Howard, Mrs. Cleveland, and Mr. Springer. These members would need to resubmit an application to the nominating committee if this policy gets updated today regarding the nominating committee. Their positions would also be posted on the Space Coast TPO and Space Coast Area Transit's websites and other social media outlets for at least 2 weeks to a month. The applications will be received and presented for approval to the TPO governing board on September 14th. And I'm here to answer any questions regarding the policy update.
We have any questions regarding policy updates? Any questions from the board? All right, thank you. In that case, may I get a motion and a second to accept?
I make a motion to accept.
All right, thank you very much. May I have a second, please? Second,
Carlos Colon.
Mr. Colon, thank you very much for your second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you, motion carries. All right, we'll move on to new business. Terry Jordan.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Good morning, board members. Thanks a lot. Once again, this point of the meeting, I'm going to turn over to Mr. David Darm. He is the Executive Director of the Florida's Coordinated Transportation Disadvantage, CTD is what we typically call it. And David is here to pretty much do a one-on-one on overview of the TD program. If you have any questions about how the board operates, the duties, the roles and responsibilities, this is a prime opportunity to get that information. And if there are any questions afterwards, I'm sure David will be glad to answer, and we can also discuss if necessary. All right, David?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Can y'all, I don't think my mic's.
Just a second. Are you gonna get that button for him? I just had to get trained on it as well.
Tricky.
You're good? You're on.
Okay, I'm good. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
There we are.
Great.
Move to the next slide. Advance it.
Okay, so I'll just say next slide and you hit it. Okay, if that works for you, that works for me. Thank you all for having me today. Thank you, Terry, for allowing us to present this to this group. I did just want to introduce myself before I get into this presentation. My name is David Darm. I am also myself an individual who is transportation disadvantaged, and I actually have a special guest with me, Emily Slate, over there in the back, who it was not only is my friend, but also was able to drive me here today. I live in Tallahassee, Florida, and so this is something that's really important to me as a program because it's been a major challenge as a person with a visual disability to get to work, to get to all my necessary activities in my life, including an event like this. And it took Emily here to take time out of her work schedule to be able to take me here. And I see this as I'm very blessed, I'm very fortunate. A lot of other people are unfortunately not having that opportunity, whether they don't have those individual friends and family members to help them, or they're lacking in transportation in their community. So this is why this program means so much to me. I have been involved in this program, well, I've been in this position since 2019, but I've actually been involved with it since 2009. So I've had many years working with the system, working with the advocates. So I'm happy to bring you both a personal perspective and passion, as well as just to share with you the knowledge of this program. And so I hope I can be able to assist with that and see where our office can be assisting y'all down the road with bringing more engagement, bringing more active membership to this board. So the next slide, so this presentation is called Transportation Disadvantage 101. So this is an overview of the program. And so if you see the next slide, so that's a summary of the program. I'll be happy to answer any questions. If you, that's my presentation, y'all. It was real simple. As you can see, it's a lot of involved, and we had this to try to illustrate because, ironically, I am a visual learner myself, even though I have a visual disability, and even with the visual aid, it's very complex to understand how this program works. So let's start with something that really, where do we begin? Where do we try to understand why do we exist as a program? So to illustrate this point, I'd like to take a quote. If you take the next slide, Steve Jobs, who was somebody that I have looked up to as a leader, has influenced me a lot in my role of being a systems change agent through the years. And he had a really interesting way of illustrating his philosophy at Apple when it came to designing products. And it was based on understanding fundamentally what's the customer's experience. Then you work backwards to the technology, not starting with the technology and figuring out how you sell that to the customer. And I believe that's the same, I think that should be applied here with transportation. We often want to start, when we get in discussions about trying to solve the problems of transportation, we want to immediately jump to the transit and the paratransit systems and how they operate, when we really need to understand fundamentally first our customers and what their needs are and why is our system existing for their service, for their need, not the other way around. So the next slide, let's ask the question is, who is our customers? Who are our customers? So next slide, we actually have a pretty broad customer base in our program. We're not just focused on disabilities, which is definitely a major component of that, but we also look at individuals who are older adults who, because of their age, causes them to find transportation barriers as they get older. We also look at income. So individuals who, because they may be able to physically drive, but because of their income restraints, they are not able to afford a vehicle or they're very limited in their capacity of access. And then a fourth group we also have in our statute is at-risk children. So these would be either children with disabilities or they're at risk of the foster care system. They're not usually as large of a group of that we serve, but they are in our statute. And these four groups, they could be, individuals with disabilities who also have low income issues. They could be older adults with disabilities. So it's not just a straight cookie cutter approach, but we try to look at them broadly and what their needs are. So this is kind of like the starting point. But the next slide, we also take a broad approach to looking at their needs, not just focusing on medical, which is a huge component, obviously a priority of ours, but we try to look at across the board what are the varying types of activities that they are in need to go to: employment, education, shopping, grocery shopping. One of the things I say to people as a person who's visually impaired is, if you have the ability to drive, you don't even think about often. You might think about where you're going to live and how close of a commute you have to work, but you may not necessarily think all the time about, okay, so I got my work needs met. How am I going to get to the grocery store? How am I going to get to get my dry cleaning done? And so we try to look at those aspects, like, maybe somebody might have transportation, whether they could use a fixed bus route, or they might have Medicaid to pay for their transportation to their doctor's office, but they may have limiting other access barriers to these other activities. So we try to look at the whole spectrum of where their needs are. And then finally, next slide, when we look at the eligibility in our customer base, we examine, I like to think of our program like Aflac. If you're not familiar with Aflac, besides their commercials, they are an insurer covering the gaps of those where other insurers are not covering for those needs. So in our sense, using that metaphor to apply here is, we look at, okay, they may have a disability and they may be needing to go to work, but they may have, like I said, access to maybe a fixed bus route system that they have the ability to use to go to work, but they can't go use that for any other activity. They may not have a vehicle in their household, which definitely would qualify them potentially as a transportation disadvantaged individual for our services. And they may not also have the financial means to use Uber or Lyft or any other kinds of private transportation options. So we examine a pretty large spectrum of different needs as part of this program. And unfortunately, in reality, our funding is limited. And so we're not an entitlement program. If somebody, if the funding runs out, that's all the funding that we can give as far as our program goes. So these steps that I'm illustrating here are also means to try to ensure that we're covering the ones that have the most significant needs and the most significant barriers to getting to their life-sustaining activities in their community, and triaging that based on the other needs of the population that we serve. Okay, next slide. So going into then foundational understanding of why the program exists. So understanding the customers now. We're actually, this is a thing about Florida that I say is we're kind of the best kept secret. This program was created 10 plus years before the Americans with Disabilities Act. The leaders of the state back in 1979 were very forward thinking and realizing that, that many of the TD population had maybe some pockets of service. So they might have lived in a metropolitan community like Orlando or Miami, and they might have had some limited transportation through their public transit services, but it was very limited. This was, this was before the Americans with Disabilities Act, so there wasn't a guarantee of paratransit services in those fixed route zones. So they had a mindset of, okay, we got to identify, despite where they live, can we be able to provide a statewide coverage, whether you lived in an urban area or a rural area or a small urban area? We wanted to figure out a way to have coverage throughout the state in all 67 counties. In addition, the leaders recognized that there were funding opportunities available, such as Medicaid and other programs that may have been providing limited transportation, say, to the doctor's office, but again, wasn't seeing the full spectrum of activities that they were trying to access. So the Florida legislature, policymakers that then were trying to create a way that we could fill the gaps and identifying the needs of this population. So over the course of 10 years, from 1979 to 1989, we were creating a system. And systems, as my experience has taught me, I got the scars to prove it, is a long, very difficult process to get to bringing in stakeholders from different industries, from different sectors, and trying to come up with a coordinated effort of serving this population. So we created, over the course of those 10 years, the system what we now call the Community Transportation Coordinator, or CTC Network. Those are the entities, including Space Coast Area Transit and other agencies that are serving our population, doing these transportation disadvantaged services and coordinating these funding sources to meet these needs. We established the laws, the policies, and the planning agencies that needed to be a part of implementation of this program. And then it all culminated in 1989 when the legislature created our agency, the Commission, and a dedicated trust fund. There was a recognition that even though we were doing what we could to coordinate Medicaid and federal funding and these other programs, human service agencies to meet these needs, it wasn't going far enough. So the legislature created a dedicated trust fund that would go towards what we call non-sponsored or not insured, if you want to look at it that way, transportation. And that is what our agency is responsible for implementing and overseeing that funding. So at that previous slide, or that beginning slide with all those complicated players on the map of the coordinated system, this is a image to try to simplify that into considering it as a three-legged stool. So visualize us in Tallahassee as the statewide policy-making board at the commission level to try to see this, oversee this need for 67 counties, but it cannot be done without the local agencies that are responsible for carrying this program. Thinking of it as this three-leg stool, there are three primary agencies or organizations that are responsible for the implementation at the local level. And those are, I mentioned the CTC. The other two agency or organizations are the Local Coordinating Board, that's y'all, and the Planning Agency, which I'll get into in a moment about each of these responsibilities. We also have our state partners with the agencies that are also doing some level of funding that we coordinate with as well, and I'll get into those in a few minutes. But this is just, again, to give you kind of the foundation to understand our program. Next slide. If any of you are excited to read right before bed and need some help to go to sleep, you're more than welcome to review our statutes. Chapter 427 is the foundation of our program, and I'm being slightly sarcastic, but it's actually a very well designed statute. I think if it's been in existence for over 30 years now, and is really designed with the customer's needs in mind and understanding the varying players and the roles that we have to serving the needs of this population. And then we at the commission level have our rule, which is to help us implement those statutes in Rule 41-2. And that is something that we'll occasionally do announcements of rulemaking adjustments to help us implement our statutes from time to time. Before I go into the next slide, I would like, one of the themes that you'll hear throughout this presentation and throughout the work you do as a board is the word coordination. I think I'm going to stop here for a second so I'm not doing all the talking. Can somebody be willing to take a guess of what does that mean to you when you hear the word coordination or coordinated transportation? Can any of you on the board here just take a gander at what you think that means to you?
One department working to coordinate with another department to make sure the customer is serviced correctly?
Yep.
Anyone else?
Between agencies?
Can you speak into the mic?
Sorry, between agencies.
Working between agencies, coordinating the needs. Okay. If you turn to the next slide, the definition in our Chapter 427 is addressing that coordination, working with these varying agencies and these players in a manner that is cost effective. This is the key. Cost effective, efficient, and reduces fragmentation or duplication of services. So in layman's terms, there was a recognition by the Florida legislature that there's not enough money to serve all the needs for all the people. We had to figure out a way to make it cost effective to try to meet as many needs as possible. And we were recognizing that there were so many different agencies working. So I mentioned often about Medicaid as an example. Medicaid would pay for your trip to the doctor's office when this program was created, but they would not pay for your trip to the grocery store. So it made no sense for the commission to be paying for trips to medical appointments if those were already covered under Medicaid, but it made absolute sense that we would pay for trips to the grocery store because, in fact, that actually does meet a medical need as well as your other life-sustaining activities, because you would be usually going there to fill out your prescription drugs that you get from your doctor. The reducing the duplication aspect was an idea that it made no sense, again, that there might be an agency paying for multiple trips. You would hear about the notorious where there would be a whole bus that would go pick somebody up, but then another bus would go right next door to the next door neighbor and pick them up, and they were not necessarily coordinated with each other. And so in theory, they were trying to figure out a way to reduce that fragmented or duplicative service so that they could meet as many needs as possible in the community. So that's kind of an overview of the program. We also want to be cognizant and mindful of the fixed route systems. Many of our larger metropolitan communities have bus services that run on the fixed route, and they also provide what was now known as ADA complementary paratransit services. Those are within the fixed route corridors. So we often want those systems to also be explored so that when our dollars are used, again, that it's meeting the needs that are not being met by those systems. Okay, next slide. So now I'm going to go into the next few minutes talking about each of the players that we were talking about, that three-legged stool, what our organization does in conjunction with each of the local agencies that we work with. Next slide. So our agency, we're located in Tallahassee. We're an independent state agency. We're administratively housed within the Florida Department of Transportation, but we operate independent in our policy making. We report directly to the governor's office. Our board consists of 7 voting members that are appointed by the governor. 5 of those members represent the business community, and 2 of them represent people with disabilities who use the system. And then 1 of the members has to be representing seniors 65 and older. We also have 8 advisors that represent the varying state agencies. So similar, made up to the way the local coordinating board here is made up, where you have Department of Transportation, Agency for Healthcare Administration, Agency for Persons with Disabilities. These are the agencies that are primarily responsible in some aspect of serving the TD population. It could be their medical needs, it could be their workforce training needs, et cetera. So they're representing on the state board as well. As far as our primary responsibilities go, a large part of it consists of administering our trust fund. I like to say we're doing a balancing act between serving the needs of the population we serve, but also being cognizant that we answer to the taxpayers of Florida, so those dollars need to be spent very, very wisely and considerately. The funding that we get, and I'll get in a minute showing you how that's broken down, gets dispersed through 4 grant programs that we have that we distribute through each of the counties to support the implementation of this service. I mentioned earlier that we develop rules and policies that help guide the program. We contract with the CTCs to do the service, as well as the planning agency to do the functions of the local coordinating board. And at the end of the year, we submit an annual performance report that goes to the governor and the legislature that summarizes the performance of our system, each of the counties, and y'all as a board review what's called the annual operating report, or the AOR. That data is collected in each of the counties and then is compiled into this annual performance report that's submitted on January 1st. Okay, next slide. This is a breakdown of the revenues that we receive through the trust fund. So for those of you who are not familiar with the way the state government operates, a lot of funding for programs get what's called general revenue, or has to compete for a giant pot of money. We're very, very blessed as a program that we're not having to compete as much for the dollars that other programs do because of this trust fund. So most of those funds largely are coming from the license tag registration renewals. Every year when you renew your license tag, a portion of the proceeds will go to our trust fund, $1.50, and that continually feeds in throughout the year. We will monitor those activities, and we're very fortunate as a state that our economy is getting bigger. We're having more people move to the state, which means our revenues are going up. So we've been monitoring this every quarter, and it continually is showing that it's on a gradual trend upward. So that is what largely is contributing to our revenues. We also get a portion of block grants from the FDOT. We also get a few other different funding sources that the legislature dedicated to be going to our trust fund. So right now, at the most recent snapshot, we're about $60 million in revenue. And that is on a state fiscal year cycle. So July 1 is the beginning of our next fiscal year. And funding that is not spent by the end of that fiscal year will go back to the trust fund and will be in reserve. So when we had the pandemic a few years ago, when it was at its worst, many of those dollars stayed in the trust fund. So we didn't lose those dollars. They will get reverted, what they call reverted and reappropriated back in the following year. Okay, next slide. Going into our grant programs real quickly, the majority of our funding goes through what's called the Trip and Equipment Grant. It operates like a block grant. This is a formula-based funding that goes to all 67 counties. It's based on, it looks at the TD population through the American Community Survey, the roads, mileage of public roads that are served, so that kind of looks at examining the demand of the service each year. And we also look at the performance of each of our CTCs when they submit invoices to us through this grant program. A portion of that is percentaged out to be distributed, allocated based on how many trips they provided in a given year. That funding formula is based on allocating the dollars. So at the beginning of July, each of the counties are given a set amount. So for Brevard County, it's about $1.7 million for this new fiscal year starting on July 1. That money is allocated to the county, but that does not necessarily mean that that is being spent entirely. What happens is we operate on a reimbursement cycle. So at the end of the month, CTC will bill us for a service that they provided that month of the trips that they provided, and then get reimbursed. So a portion of that funding will get then paid. So there will be systems sometimes that will not spend all those dollars. That doesn't mean they're guaranteed to use those dollars, but when they invoice us, we have verification that a trip occurred, that a person was served, that they went to a destination, and so that is the basis of how the funding is actually paid. The planning grant is another component that goes to, in this case, we have Space Coast Area Transit also serves in this role as the planning agency. That is total as dollars of the grant is $1.8 million. That goes to each of the planning agencies throughout the state to implement these activities, like these meetings, that what you just voted on, the TDSP, the development of that, or the updating of that. That funding is meant to support those activities. Next slide. Two other grants that we have are the Shirley Conroy Capital Assistance Grant. That is a program that the Department of Transportation designates funding for each year for us It's a competitive grant that goes to CTCs that want to apply for that to purchase capital equipment in support of serving the TD population. So capital equipment are vehicles, technology, any kinds of training maybe that they might need to support the services of the population. And then finally, last grant we have is the Innovative Service Development Grant. That is a relatively new program that is a competitive grant that is meant to test new services. So a CTC can apply for this if they want to, say, test using Uber or Lyft in their area or a model like that, on-demand service that they may not have necessarily available right now. It may be to serve an underserved population like we have right now in the Treasure Coast. Indian River and St. Lucie County are doing a special project under that grant to serve people with developmental disabilities and cognitive disabilities who are historically been underserved in their community. So that grant we issue out each year. We just awarded those grants for the new fiscal year, and that this year was about $6 million that we got appropriated. All right, before I go on to the next slide, we'll go on to the next slide to one more. Okay, before we go on, maybe I'll stop here and answer any questions that you may have about our program before I get into the local piece, about as far as the state side of it, our commission.
I don't have any questions, but that was just really informative. I learned a lot from that, so thank you.
Okay, good. I'm not losing. I can't see facial expressions, so
Neither can
just
I.
keep
I'm blind
going.
too.
Thank you. All right, so I will go through the next three slides, deal with the three-legged stool. So this one, let's look at the planning agency. The best way to think of the planning agency is it took me a while to figure them out relative to the local coordinating board, the CTC. The best way I describe it or understand it is think of our staff in Tallahassee. We staff, me and my team, we will staff our statewide commission. The planning agency would serve a similar role for the local coordinating board. They are the staff and basically carrying the implementation of the program for the local coordinating board, and perform other activities, of course, with that responsibility. Most of these agencies are usually metropolitan planning organizations or regional planning councils. Y'all are actually, I think, an exception where the CTC also serves in this role, with Space Coast Area Transit being in this capacity. So the planning agency would be staffing the local coordinating board, organizing these meetings for y'all, as well as identifying and appointing the members to the board. A major component of their role is also to facilitate the procurement of the CTC. So we at the state level have delegated that responsibility to the planning agencies because we believe that they know best their local needs. So they will facilitate a procurement. Especially if they're a private agency, they have to go through a competitive bid process. And then based on that, they will make a recommendation to the state commission on approving that CTC designation. So we just had our commission meeting last week in Punta Gorda, and approved, I want to say, like 12 CTC designations because they operate on a 5-year grant cycle or contract cycle, And so the planning agency at the end of that 5-year grant or a contract will go through that competitive process and then make that recommendation to us. And most often, the commission will approve what the planning agency recommends because we examine that their processes, they went through the steps that they needed to identify the entity most qualified for that role. Y'all talked about the TDSP or the Transportation Disadvantaged Service Plan. The planning agency, of course, helps develop that and update that on an annual basis for y'all. And then they also help with examining the annual operating report data, helping the CTC with that submission. So that's kind of a very high-level overview of the planning agency's role. Next slide, we'll look at the local coordinating board, or LCB. This is what y'all consist of as representing stakeholders that are impacted by this program. So consisting of primarily thinking about the riders in mind, so people with disabilities, older adults, individuals with low income, and their families, considering their needs. So the idea was that we would have advocates from the community that would be a voice, because understanding that I hate to use the cliche, it takes a village to serve this population, and that's what these boards are trying to do. It also examines what are the other major players that are serving our population. So folks from the transit industry, paratransit industry, Voc Rehab and Blind Services, the human service agencies. These are the programs or the organizations directly serving or impacting the needs of our population. And the idea is that they gather together, at least on a quarterly basis, to discuss where the areas that need improvement or implementation. So what you just voted on, the Transportation Disadvantaged Service Plan, that's a huge component of that, which identifies how this program is implemented in this county, in this service area. You look at the eligibility guidelines. So how are people being determined eligible for transportation disadvantaged services in the community, as well as trip priorities. Let me speak on the trip priorities, because I think that's something that some people don't realize this at the state level. Even though at the state we develop policies, guidelines, and have the foundation about who is eligible for service and what it supports, but we leave the locals to determining how to best use those dollars in meeting their needs. So you'll have communities that prioritize medical, and most of their transportation disadvantaged dollars go to medical services. Whereas other communities may, such as, I'll give an example, Martin County, their local coordinating board determined that they wanted to cap 50% of their TD funding for medical and the rest to go to the other activities, so you're not leaving people who need to go to work or other activities behind in that process. So again, we leave that to the local coordinating board and the CTC to develop those criteria of how they determine where those dollars are spent. So, and then in addition to that, the role of the local coordinating board, you develop a grievance committee. So that's, I think, designed really to, when there are challenges with the services, there's a process that you can use to, evaluate those needs and address those needs. You also have public forums like this where people from the community and the members of the public can come and speak about the challenges. I went to one recently in a community where the CTC was running into some challenges with their scheduling software when they launched it recently, and they had a lot of members of the public coming up and speaking about those challenges, but it was a very good faith effort. There was a lot of recognition about those, that the CTC was trying to implement improvements to that. So it was a very positive, informal approach to identifying needs and challenges of the services. Again, the local coordinating board tries to play that forum so that those discussions happen in the public view. One last thing to mention, I know you all have a general counsel that can speak to this much more clearly than me, but all the board meetings, of course, are held in the sunshine. We, as a state of Florida, are very expansive in our public access, so members of the public can attend and understand what is being voted on. So these boards have to operate within the guidelines of the Sunshine Law. The next slide, the third leg of the stool, and the entity that is primarily responsible for the delivery of the services is the CTC, the Community Transportation Coordinator. They can be a variety of organizations. It just depends on the community. Some of them are governmental agencies or county government programs, transit agencies, but we also have not-for-profit organizations like Councils on Aging. We have for-profit organizations sometimes that take over and do those services if there's no other entity there that's available. Or it could be a planning agency. I believe in the past we might have had a planning agency or two that have been in that role as well. But it's in essence whatever the agency is that is wanting to take on the responsibility of servicing the county or the multi-county area that they've been designated to serve. So in this case, Brevard's is Space Coast Area Transit is responsible for the 72 mile stretch of the county of serving with our dollars to meet the needs of the TD population. The CTC also examines the board. What the board determines is the trip priorities and the eligibility criteria. The CTC is responsible for screening that and determining that who does fit the qualifications of being eligible for these services. And then they will bill us for the services that they provide under our grant program, as well as any other agencies that they may be doing services for. Okay, next slide. And then another element just to consider is, in addition to what our program does, our agency, we have partnering agencies, as I mentioned earlier, that serve on our board. And many of them we call as purchasing. So they will purchase a trip for a segment of the TD population. A good example is APD, the Agency for Persons with Disabilities. They serve people with developmental disabilities, provide home and community-based services. So many of those clients of APD might need transportation to go to their daycare or adult day training program, or go to work with supported employment. So APD in those cases might be paying for a trip. It could be through the CTC or it could be outside of the coordinated system, but we do work with these agencies to support the needs that we cannot ourselves support, or at least examine an element of those needs based on their clientele. So, okay, any questions on the local side? Before I I'm going to close with a few statistics and then wrap it up with what y'all can do to enhance this program. So are there any questions on the planning agency, CTC, or local coordinating board? I'm sure you have questions on the LCB side, since that I know was an area of interest here.
So I have some questions about.
Yes, Ms. Cleveland.
You mentioned, sorry. This is Jennifer Cleveland. The grievance committee. So I don't know what's happened to my throat, sorry. But I tend to get, because of my past role in the community, I tend to get a lot of people reach out to me with complaints and challenges with, in the past, we had a lot of complaints about being refused service, about, just very unprofessional behavior on the staff, on the part of the customer service staff, things like that, and that seems to be resolving itself. But I still have people contacting me about challenges that they're having. So I want to make sure that I do the right thing. Like when I got on the board, I brought up all of those challenges that had been going on for years and brought forward a bunch of the complaints that were still sitting there, repeatedly happening, the same kind of complaints. And a lot of the board members told me that they, in the board meeting, said that they never even knew there were problems like that, things like that. And so I made it a point to start kind of bringing things up at the board meeting so that everybody knows what's going on. And then I'm starting to find out about the grievance committee. So am I doing the right thing? Should we create a grievance committee, or should we continue to bring it forward at the board meeting, or how do we handle that? How do I handle that so I do the right thing?
That's a really good question. So I think the way that I would want to be sure, first of all, I will confer with my staff, maybe giving a little bit more specific guidelines on that after this meeting. So I don't want to speak out of turn, because they have a history of how the grievance committee process has worked with local coordinating boards. But I'll give you sort of general ideas. First, your role on the board, sounds to me like you're doing what's is intended to do, which is to bring this information to the public. The local coordinating board is an advisor to the CTC, not an oversight board. But like you said earlier, a lot of times people may not know the process of where to go to file a grievance concern. And so you as a board member, part of your role is to bring that awareness to it. And I believe the grievance committee is kind of structured as a formal process that you could be able to bring in those concerns and how they could be best addressed. We also have, at the state level, we have an ombudsman program in our office. So oftentimes, we have, unfortunately, sometimes this happens where people have addressed their needs through the local process. They worked with their CTC, but they were not getting their needs met. So they will work with our office, and we'll try to sort out that individual case when it's more extreme. So we can give you that information as well to reach out to our office when there's maybe a more unique circumstance that can't necessarily be addressed at the local level. So we can provide you that information. I think it's on our website too for the ombudsman
Okay,
at
thank
the
you.
state office. So
Thank you.
I hope that answered your question.
Yes, I think so, yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Any other?
Any other questions before we move on to the next chapter? All right, thank you.
Okay. Real quick here on some statistics. So, next slide. Next slide. There we go. So, Brevard County, like all the systems, reports data through the annual operating report each year. That operates on a state fiscal year cycle. So, the data that I'm showing you comes from the July 1, 2021 through June 30th, 2022. We're about to enter the next cycle here in September. So, but this is the most I can give you as far as up to date. This is, but we took that data as well as our direct funded. So I'm showing you a comparison of paratransit trips, which is the bulk of our program. Paratransit trips are categorized as usually door-to-door scheduled trips, so not fixed route, not your scheduled bus that goes on a route that doesn't change or deviate from that route. Brevard County, as you can see in this slide here, has over the last 3 years reported trips going down, and that is that's consistent with many of the counties because of the pandemic. So in the fiscal year 2019-20, the pandemic hit at the very tail end of that, and beginning in March of that year. So you can see that the next 2 years, those numbers went down. I will say, though, for our funding, the yellow bar, that's the trip and equipment grant. That's our bulk of our funding from the trust fund. Those trips have actually started kind of stabilizing, and they're actually seeming to gradually go up. So that's a good sign that even though it's been an impact on our system to see trips going down, we have seen that over the course of the last year, that trips are starting to gradually get back up to their pre-COVID-19 levels. Next slide shows a pie chart of, this is the AOR data that showed the trips by purpose, the breakdown of that. Brevard County's 42% of them are going to employment, which is a pretty good sign, I think, because many of the systems, I say we of course want medical to be a priority, but it can sometimes be overshadowing the other important activities. So in Brevard's case, a large portion of the trips are being reported as employment related, followed by education, day programs, so day training, or maybe college programs or training. And then you have another breakdown of other types of activities like medical and life-sustaining. Food is a very small percentage, less than 1%.
Question.
Sure.
What is the 12%?
The 12% that was life-sustaining and medical are both 12%.
Okay, and what is the other 12%?
Medical.
And the 34%?
The 34% is education.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. The next slide is actually incorrect. I apologize. Some kind of technical error when I was doing the Excel spreadsheet, so I'm going to give you the corrected numbers. But this is a slide that shows a breakdown of the funding sources that are supporting TD trips in this community. 10% of that funding is coming from us, is reported from the commission. 6% of that is coming from APD. 3% is coming for education, so school, district program activities. And then Elder Affairs is about 1%. And I believe that Elder Affairs doesn't actually themselves purchase transportation, but they might be reported as like senior programs that might be doing those trips. But the bulk of this was reported as 80% was other. So I'm actually not quite sure what the category that Brevard County has used for other. I mean, Terry, I don't know if you can answer that, but might be federal funding, it might be other sources of funding that are going into the community to support TD trips. So that's just a breakdown of what is in our annual operating report from the last fiscal year cycle. Next slide. The next two slides show our trip and equipment grant dollars and where they're going. So this is specifically our funding based on the last fiscal year. So from July through June, it's really kind of hard to see, but this information is all available on our website, so you can look at it at your leisure. But this is basically showing that the trips kind of had a steady throughout the year. A little bit of a dip during the holiday season, but it went back up. The trips started going back up through February, March, and throughout the rest of that year. I don't know if that's a trend that was because of the pandemic, or if it's just that's the natural course of things where you might see some trips going down during the holiday season and pick back up after that. The average trip miles that occurred with our funding was about 11 miles for an average trip. And that doesn't surprise me one bit, because I know Brevard County is quite a stretch, quite a challenge to serve for the 72-mile stretch of road or of county. So that's just a statistic to understand a little bit more about the program here. And then the last slide on this data is looking at the days of the week and the times of the day that our funding seems to be going. For the days of the week, it's pretty much what you would expect. The majority of the trips happening during the weekdays, of course. For the time of the day, it seems to be that most of the trips are happening in the afternoon around that 3 o'clock time. My guess is that I don't know much about Brevard specifically, but I've seen a lot where you might have dialysis can be often a huge demand for our system. So a lot of the dialysis appointments could be like early in the morning and then taking people home in the afternoon. So this just gives you kind of a summary of what the data is showing when you break it down by days of the week and by times of the day. And then last, just to close up, what can you all do as members of the local coordinating board and as advocates? Next slide, I'll just give you just some food for thought. As Ms. Cleveland was mentioning earlier about being a voice, I think that is so important. I've viewed it in my work as being a disability advocate, both within and outside government. I have viewed my role as being a voice for those who do not have a voice. I understand, and many of you also understand this, that this system is very complicated. Not just what we do on the transportation front, but as a whole, what people with disabilities, older adults, what they have to go through to get a service need met can be really overwhelming. And so that's why it's really critical that we have advocates that can be their voice when they cannot speak for themselves. So that's fundamentally the most important role that you can play, continually to show up to these meetings, do what you can to be a voice for those needs. In addition to that, you can financially contribute to the program. You all do that when you renew your license tag, for those of you who drive. But you can also donate $1 on the form that you fill out when you renew when you do your registration. You actually have an option that you can provide a voluntary $1. I've told my friends about that, and they say, I never looked at that until you told me. So that could be something you could tell your friends and family to donate $1 or more to the trust fund. And by the way, those dollars, those voluntary dollars, they go back to the local community. So those dollars would not go to Tallahassee. Those would go right back to Brevard County. We really need, and this year I'm hoping in the next few years, pushing for more advocacy and awareness with legislators, elected officials. This program wouldn't exist without them. Your chair usually consists of elected officials, so we see them actively engaged with the local coordinating board, but we also need state legislators and representatives and senators to be understanding why this program is important. I always say, I can do my part in Tallahassee to bring awareness, but it's not going to come as impactful from someone like me who might be seen as a bureaucrat, a state government person, versus somebody who is in the community, who's volunteering their time and engaging their direct representative, their local delegation. So please reach out to us if you have an opportunity to meet with them. We can provide you with information that can help you with that conversation. We also have an event in Tallahassee during legislative session. So next year, I believe it will be in February. We'll provide that information as we get closer to it. We have a day at the Capitol. We invite people to come up. So if you are interested in that event, we'll provide that information, and you can find out how to maybe hitch a ride with somebody who's coming up there for that event. And that's a way to get physical presence to the state capitol to see the importance of this program. So, and then lastly, working local, again, it takes a village. It's understanding that we all have a part to play, and it's not just us individually, but we have to work together as a group. So engaging with your CTC staff, your planning staff, and your advocates in the community, finding them a way to work together and finding where those challenges are and how to best meet those needs through a collaborative process is really going to make a big difference. So I really appreciate this time. The last slide gives my contact information. Usually I have my service dog with me, so I will answer any questions the best I can, and any tough questions I usually refer to him, but he's not here to save me, so. But I'm just very pleased. Thank you for so much time. I didn't mean to take up as much time on the presentation, but I hope that this was helpful. And Terry and I were talking about maybe when y'all get more members on the board, maybe we can have a more expansive presentation again. We also do this at our annual conference, which will be in August, at the end of August. I think it's the 29th through the 30th in Orlando, SeaWorld Renaissance Resort. We do have, that's a registration you have to be able to be a part of, but we always do this presentation at that event because it is always very popular. So I think that's all I can cover. If there's anything else.
Any questions or comments from Mr. Dorm? No, from the board?
Thank you so much. Thank you. I learned so much. Thank you.
This was very engaging, very professional, very engaging, absolutely a wonderful presentation. I even like that you coordinated your mouse with your tie. So,
I have a thing for green.
The color of money, yes, but really it was very engaging, very interesting. I'm so glad that you came all the way here from Tallahassee today, and thank you to your driver who took the time to drive you here. Thank you very, very much. It was greatly appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, we'll move on to the next item here. Next item is member reports. We'll start at the end here. Ms. Cleveland, do you have a report?
I do not.
All right, Felicia? Do you have a report? Anything you want to say, Camille?
Nothing.
All right, Mr. Cologne? All right, I do not have a report either.
No, thank you.
All right, so we have none of this. Public comment. Public comment, all right, thank you. All right, we have a public comment from Christy Cavallo.
Okay, down. Good girl, good girl.
Do we have a timer?
Yes, sorry, I'm trying to find the, okay. I'm blind and deaf, I'm Christy Cavallo. I do have a few concerns and questions from my point stand of past trying to fill out the application and trying to get transportation around in my local area. I've been blind for almost 20 years, so I have a lot of experience on a lot of things that have taken place. Excuse me, I have to get my dog down. Stay. Okay, so one of the things, if you don't mind bearing with me, I would like to discuss a couple of things on the application. When I was trying to fill out the application, some of the things on there, when you are a disabled person and you're trying to fill, is very discouraging, in my opinion, to, and I actually would like them to be considered to be removed from the application whenever, and maybe create a new application idea. For example, would be, could any of the applicant's household members, family, or friends provide transportation? And explain. And also the applicant currently being transported to appointments. I feel like that is not in a helpful way. I feel like that is a way of like stating, well, if you have these other options, then why are you reaching out to us? Understand what I'm saying? And so I've also had other applicants, people that applied, and they were like, I just threw the paper away because it felt like it was just too much information. They were wanting all of your disability information. It doesn't seem helpful. It seems more like deterring of you wanting to trying to get help. That's my bottom line on this whole application. So I'm just doing a few things for is the applicant enrolled in any other programs that were paid for or provide applicant needs. So basically, if you have a family member, which I do have my mom, but what if she's sick and I need to get to my appointment that day? Then I have no other option to back that up. Or if I, other things arise. What if I want to go do something, meet with my friend for lunch, and I just don't have why does it have to be so specific things? So that's why I said I feel like this whole application process could be a little bit more friendly and more open to people with disabilities like what I have, and it's I've had nothing but negative issues with. Unfortunately, the lady, whenever I called, she was told me immediately I was not eligible for and so they did handle that and they took care of that eventually. But I was already distraught and not even wanting to consider riding the bus idea after that whole situation.
When did you call in, and when did they tell you that? Was that recent?
No, that was a while back, and I actually had Jennifer Cleveland help me through some of that because I happened to know her, and she reached out to me and was trying to be she was actually very helpful and giving me advice on what to do for that. The other thing too is I did try to do the fixed route first, and that was a total mess up. I got on the bus, and they never did mention any of the names of the stops. They just, it was very loud. It was very hard to get. I was trying to figure out, at that time, I was trying to figure out a way to get my kids picked up to and from school. So I tried that. And I got to the area where they have the main central hub in Cocoa. It was in a really bad area. I had people, I could hear them dealing drugs left and right. I was very uncomfortable. I had a man come to me and said, "Please watch yourself. I've already been mugged 3 times." And, and it's just, he said, "This is just not a good area." And he said, I can tell that you have visual issues. And so I actually had to get someone to help me to get me back on whatever bus it was that I needed to get to my next location. So the whole thing was just, just from my personal experience, has been nothing but really not good. So those are a couple of things I wanted to advocate, maybe considering the central hub, having employees there that could actually, kind of monitor the area to where it's a little, because you're catching, it's the central area where you're catching multiple buses coming in and out, and that employee could say, okay, this is the bus that you need to get onto wherever your next location is. So, those kind of things are all of the concerns that I've had in the past. But my main thing is this application. I've had multiple people come to me and feel like it's just not, it's not a good, it's not an inviting application. It's the best I can, describe for that.
And I've heard that from a lot of people, and I think you did talk about that in the presentation where you talked about having to find out if there's other people that can give you a ride. And I had to go through that when I got my when I first started riding the paratransit, and I was actually refused service and told just being blind doesn't qualify being able to ride the paratransit. And then when they finally sent me the application, it did say all that, and they said, well, why can't your husband take you, things like that. And it is very discouraging. And so how can we address that so that because we want to encourage people to use the system, but it does sound like when you ask those questions and the way you describe it and the way it is on the application, it does make people think, they're just going to say no, or that I'm being a bother, or I shouldn't be using it. So what do we do?
Yeah, that's it exactly. She explained it very well, and that's what I've had multiple people have also said. Well, maybe it's just not, maybe they're not really wanting to help you be independent, and that is the hardest thing for us, is trying to become independent, and that is what we're trying really hard, and it's hard to ask other people. Hey, can you take me here? Hey, can you take me there? And go out of their way. And sometimes you just don't ask, and you're stuck at your house all week long. So.
Yeah, there's only so
Thank
much
you,
you
Ms.
can
Cavallo.
do.
Yeah.
With
Thank
that.
you for your public comment, Ms. Cavallo. So we have the main department heads here. We have Terry here, department heads here. We're about to adjourn, so maybe we could get together and have a conversation.
Madam Chair, if you don't mind, for the sake of the board, I would like to respond.
Yes, please.
Yes, no problem. All right, thank you.
You're welcome. I know we're running close to time, so I won't take too long. First, I'll say thank you to the young lady for bringing your concerns to the LCB board. On the first item of the application, and this may be even something I could defer to David at the same time, but we use an application as a twofold response to this, and particularly to Ms. Cleveland. It's an application that has come before this board and being approved by this board in the process of the revamp of the application. And secondarily, we use an application that is more or less of a template that is from the state. So we're not asking specific questions to our users to discourage the use of our service. But as David mentioned, as Ms. Cleveland echoed, we would like to know if individuals have an alternative way of being transported, because when the funds run out, in cases if it does come to that, we would encourage that individual to utilize a service that they have available to them, and then individuals that don't have any other alternative, and particularly for medical transportation, we would like to make sure that they still receive the service, because my finance director is right behind me, and she'll say, we're not going to stop transporting our passengers. We just can't file for the money to be reimbursed to us. So, of course, we have individuals that will be in the hierarchy. If you're taking a trip for leisure versus a medical trip, those are things that we prioritize, but we're not trying to discourage anyone from utilizing the service at all. But the application is designed in a specific way to capture specific information on purpose. That I did want to make sure the board is well aware of that. And like I mentioned, the board would have seen the application itself prior to even being, how long ago, Carmen? Thank you. So 2017 was when the application itself was updated. So it would have come before this board at that point to review, make comment, make any edits before it was distributed to the general public to be utilized for the service that we provide.
Will it be possible to maybe just reword it in a way that, because that makes perfect sense. I totally get it, but maybe just rewording it in a way that's like, hey, if you have another ride, the services are limited. We are going to support you, but we need to know this, or something like that. I mean, just to make it, because I get it. I get what you're saying. Just to make it sound a little softer.
We could definitely consider it, and Carmen was very much involved, and she can speak to that.
Yeah, and let me tell you the nightmare of that application. We had an 8-page application.
Can you speak into the microphone,
8
Carmen?
pages. We got applications from FDOT. We got them from Lynx. We got them from different systems. And when all these applications coming back, because Brevard County had an honor system, we didn't have an application. You called us because you needed us, and we gave you transportation. Well, TD came in and audited us. That was the biggest finding that we ever had because we didn't have applications on file for no one. Not even an ID, proof of age, we had nothing. That was the biggest audit we had that we failed miserably. So we got all our sister counties and all the other agencies to send us their applications. Daytona Beach is 12 pages. That's a discouraging. I was like, there's no way I'm going to do a 12-page application. Links, 10 pages. Indian River, I think it was about 5 pages. We took all those applications and made it into a front and back. We took the verbiage that TD needed in there. We send it to, who was our FDOT before? Who? Okay, we sent her the application. It was 3 pages, and she said, you can delete this one, you can delete this, because we told her we want it just front and back. She says, you need this, you need this, you need this, and that's when Jen brought it, once she approved it, brought it to this board, and they approved it by then. Or else you would have had a book, because we didn't want anybody to get discouraged having to fill out a pamphlet of questions.
So are we down to the bare minimum questions that we need
down to
filled
the
out in
bare
order
minimum.
to qualify for funding?
Mhm.
These are the basic,
And the
that's it,
application
there's
went
no-
right back to TD, the auditors, and they approved it.
and then they approved it.
Because we try to cut it down to the bare minimum to still fit the TD rules and regulations.
All right,
If I
thank you.
may,
Yes, yes, Ms. McNulty?
has this applicant been communicating with SCAT over the application, or is this the first time you heard about it? Well, then, a lot of it obviously is a communication issue, and I think while I'm married to a person who has a hearing and a vision loss for many, many years. And it did take a little bit of time to get adjusted to the system. We lived in 2 other counties here in Florida, Brevard and Palm Beach. So this opened a line of communication, and I get the impression that Mr. Jordan and Carmen Baez are going to work with this applicant and see if we can get the kinks ironed out. Am I correct?
By all means, Ms. Nolte, we definitely will take Ms. Cleveland's recommendation to soften the language. And I would also encourage the young lady that made the comment that you mentioned others are coming to you with concerns. Please direct them to myself directly or Carmen. We can have these conversations. We can enlighten individuals as to why the application as it is. And as Carmen said, we've reduced it from what is a multi-page application in many other agencies down to just a 2-page request for information, and it was more or less what is required. And we're trying to ensure that everyone can receive the service that we provide. So, Ms. Nolte, yes, by all means. And then the second item brought, there's definitely concerns with using the fixed route service, especially if visually impaired. But we have annunciators on our vehicles that announce major locations, example, hospitals, shopping centers, things of that nature, major intersections. It's an automated system, so when the bus is getting close to that intersection, it automatically announces. I can say that yes, on some vehicles, some routes, there is a lot of noise. Passengers are talking loud, but there's nothing we can control. But we have the annunciators on the bus. It announces inside and outside. So when the bus is pulling up to the stop, it announces the route that is being served and the destination. So if you're waiting outside at a bus stop and the bus is pulling up, it will say Route 6 serving Cocoa Transit Center. The location of the transit center, we would love to say we were in a better location, but it's nothing in our control. And the environment has been greatly improved since the police command center has been open across the street. So, and then lastly, on that same note, Carmen and Jazz right beside her also do a good bit of travel training. So anyone who wants to utilize our service for the first time that is apprehensive or needs a little bit more information or just a little assistance, they actually go out and ride with the passengers themselves, or have one of our employees ride with the passengers themselves to show them how to navigate the system to get to their destination, how the system is utilized. And this group has heard me mention it multiple times. We are really embracing technology. So we have the technology on our devices now that allow us to know where the bus is, when the bus is coming, how close it is to you. And then it could actually do a trip. And I'm sure Felicia has used it probably many times. So you can do a trip, a planner, so it tell you where to go to, where to get the bus, when the bus will be there. All this is information that we have available to our customers. But Ms. Nolte said it correctly. It may just be the matter of the communication and us being able to communicate this to you. So if you like, once again, be glad to work with you after and share any additional information.
I have a question about the bus announcing. I have not heard that on the 21. I have not heard it outside the bus, but I also haven't ridden in, I think, a month. But I have not heard it on the 21. And usually my driver, always my driver tells me when my stop is coming up. He yells at me from his seat. But I have not heard that. I've heard the announce inside the bus a few times, but never the outside of the bus.
Well, I've got my ITS coordinator sitting in the back corner. I'm sure he's taking notes as well. And it's supposed to be available for all our vehicles. One of the issues we came across when we very first implemented it, and Lance is here as well, one of the issues with the speakers, the external speakers, where it can be announced on the outside, we actually had to cut holes in our buses to accommodate the speakers. So we went through every necessary step we could to make sure that we're going to be, and there's no requirement. That's the first thing I'd like to mention. It's not an ADA compliance requirement. It's an enhancement that we're looking to make for our customers and the usability for any of our visually or even for our customers that are hearing impaired. We have it where the ticker scrolls so it's visible. So we try to do everything possible, but take note of that, the announcements that are not being played, and we'll see what's going on and then have it addressed.
I know.
And one thing, sorry, Ms. Cleveland mentioned one more thing, the driver. Typically, if you get on the bus, even if you're no issues with sight, no issues with being able to hear, you just don't know the area. You say to the bus driver, hey, I need to get off at X location. Typically, our operators, as Ms. Cleveland just said, will stop at that stop and say, Holmes Regional Medical Center, and you know that's where you want to get off, this is your stop. So our operators do that for our passengers on a regular basis. So if you're trying to go somewhere you don't know where you're getting close to, by all means, just let the operator know where you want to get off, or if you are continuing to use the system, where you want to get off, and they'll definitely assist you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you very much. Good rebuttal. All right, thank you. All right, so, excuse me. Can I have any other comments from the board? All right, may I have a motion to adjourn? Motion to adjourn. A second? All right, all those in favor, get up and go home. Thank you.
Thank you.
The opinions expressed by any member of the public during any period of public comment do not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of the Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, or the program sponsor, and are solely those of the presenter. The Board of County Commissioners of Brevard County, Florida, Space Coast Government Television, and the program sponsor hereby expressly disclaim any and all responsibility or liability for any defamatory or slanderous statements expressed by any member of the public during any such period.